Geography is the ultimate chessboard of power. For thousands of years, the most valuable pieces on that board were not cities or mines, but narrow strips of land and water. Control a single mountain pass or a slender strait, and you could command the destiny of continents. This is the story of a geographical bottleneck where the flow of entire civilizations was squeezed into a thread. But ancient empires did not merely post guards at these vital spots. They poured their wealth, their ingenuity, and their sheer ambition into stone, building monumental megastructures designed to lock these gates shut for their benefit alone. By the end of this journey, you will see 15 ancient wonders in a completely new light, not just as ruins, but as master keys to the vault of history. What drove kings and emperors to move mountains and drain treasuries for a patch of rock or a strip of sea? And what can these silent stone sentinels teach us about the timeless hunger for control? The first great lock on our journey sits in a landscape of desolate beauty. Stretching west from the heart of China, 1,000 miles into a rain shadow of towering mountains and endless dunes, lies a slender green ribbon of life known as the Corridor. This was the original Silk Road superhighway, a single fertile valley squeezed between the Tibetan Plateau to the south and the vast Gobi Desert to the north. For any caravan carrying silk, jade, or spices, this was the only way through, and the Han dynasty of ancient China decided to build the door. They engineered an entire landscape of control. They extended the Great Wall system deep into this arid corridor, creating a fortified network of tamped earth ramparts, military outposts, and chains of beacon towers that could relay signals with smoke and fire across hundreds of miles in a single day. This was not merely a defensive barrier against nomadic tribes from the steppes, it was a protected commercial lane. Imagine a guarded toll road built on a continental scale. By securing this corridor, the Han dynasty ensured that the immense wealth flowing between east and west moved on their terms. They could tax every bale of silk, protect every caravan from bandits, and crucially, prevent any rival power from establishing a foothold and cutting the artery themselves. The stone and earth sentinels of the Gansu Corridor were less about keeping people out and more about keeping the most valuable trade in human history firmly and profitably in. But the Han dynasty was not the only power to understand this principle of the guarded corridor. Far to the west, where the empires of Rome and Persia brushed against one another, another choke point demanded a fortress of staggering ambition. Perched on a towering cliff overlooking the great Euphrates River, the city of Dura was not born of peaceful trade. It was conceived as a weapon. Founded by successors of Alexander the Great, this settlement commanded the only reliable crossing of the Euphrates for hundreds of miles in either direction. Any caravan moving between the Mediterranean world and the riches of Mesopotamia and Persia had to pass directly beneath its walls. The Romans, masters of pragmatic control, later seized it and transformed it into one of the most formidable frontier garrisons of their entire Eastern Empire. Dura was a customs house built like a citadel. Every merchant, every diplomat, every shipment of incense or silk was funneled through its gates, where Roman officials could levy taxes and monitor the flow of goods and information. Its sheer walls and massive towers were a statement in stone, a permanent announcement that this river, this road, this vital seam between worlds belonged to Rome. Yet the true story of Dura is not just in its formidable architecture, but in what was left behind when it finally fell. The city became a time capsule, buried by the sands after a brutal siege. Archaeologists digging there found not just Roman barracks, but a stunningly diverse tapestry of life, a synagogue with vibrant biblical murals, an early Christian house church, and temples to Persian and Mesopotamian gods. This fortress, built to control a choke point, became a silent witness to the very cultural exchange it was meant to regulate. It shows us that even the most militarized gate cannot stop the flow of ideas, faith, and art that travel alongside the spices and the silks. The stones intended to divide empires ended up preserving a mosaic of the ancient world itself. A river of wealth poured into the ancient world, but it needed a harbor. And for the Mediterranean, that harbor was Alexandria. Founded by Alexander the Great at the western edge of the Nile Delta, the city's location was of economic geography. It sat at the precise point where the agricultural riches of Egypt, especially its life-giving grain, met the seafaring networks of the entire inland sea. Yet a harbor is only as good as a captain's ability to find it, especially along a coast notorious for its shallow, shifting sands and hidden shoals. The solution was not a wall or a fortress, but a tower of light so grand it would become one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Pharos of Alexandria. For centuries, we have remembered it as a marvel of engineering, a testament to human ingenuity reaching for the sky. But peel back that layer of awe, and you find a machine of pure economic control. Its brilliant fire, by polished bronze mirrors, was a beacon of security in the dark, yes, but also a lure. It guided the grain ships from the Nile, vital for feeding the city of Rome, and the merchant vessels laden with spices, silks, and gems from the Red Sea and India, directly into the jaws of a perfectly designed system. The complex harbor of Alexandria, with its separate ports and fortified islands, was a controlled funnel. Every ship drawn in by the comforting light of the Pharos would then be met by the port authorities of the Ptolemaic kings, and later the Roman emperors. Here, in the orderly docks under the shadow of that great tower, cargo was unloaded, assessed, and taxed with ruthless efficiency. The lighthouse did not just save lives, it guaranteed revenue. It turned the dangerous, chaotic act of finding port into a reliable, repeatable process, ensuring that the wealth of continents flowed into a single, manageable point where the rulers could take their share. The Pharos was the ultimate welcome sign, but it was a welcome with a price. A brilliant symbol that the greatest safety the ancient world could offer came with the absolute certainty of being counted, measured, and taxed. While Alexandria mastered the sea with light, another empire carved its fortune from the very bones of the desert. Deep in the sandstone canyons of southern Jordan, the city of Petra did not simply occupy a trade route. It became an inescapable trap of geography, engineered with breathtaking audacity. The approach to Petra is a lesson in psychological and physical control. For miles, the landscape offers nothing but arid hardship. Then a traveler would find a single, terrifyingly narrow crack in the mountain wall, known as the. This is not a road, it is a geological slit, a winding canyon so deep and close that the sky becomes a thin, distant ribbon of blue. For any caravan laden with frankincense and myrrh from Arabia or silks from the east, there was no other way. They were funneled single file through this shadowy, mile-long corridor, their precious goods and weary animals completely vulnerable. And at the very moment the finally opens, the traveler is confronted not with a city gate, but with a monumental facade glowing in the sun, the Treasury, or Al. Carved directly into the rose-red cliff face, this 2-story masterpiece of columns and statues was less a building and more a billboard of absolute power. While it likely served as a royal tomb, its placement was pure propaganda. Emerging from the oppressive darkness of a caravan master would be stunned into submission by this display of wealth and artistry. a clear message that the rulers who commanded such craftsmanship also commanded his fate and his goods. But Petra's true genius was not in stone, but in water. In a desert where a single waterskin meant life or loss, there were hydrological wizards. They carved intricate channels into the canyon walls, built dams and cisterns, creating the only reliable water source for countless miles. A caravan could avoid but it could not avoid thirst. This mastery of water forced every merchant to stop, to pay for water for his animals and himself, and in doing so, to pay taxes on every ounce of incense and spice. Petra did not just tax trade, it manufactured the necessity for trade to come to it, turning a barren canyon into the ultimate toll booth by controlling the one currency more precious than gold in the desert. A drink of water. From the sun-baked canyons of Petra, the logic of control shifts from desert water to a narrow strip of, a place where geography presented the ultimate prize and demanded the ultimate defense. No city in history understood the value of a choke point better than Constantinople. Perched on a triangular peninsula, it gripped the throat of the Bosporus Strait, the only maritime passage between the resource-rich Black Sea and the wealth of the Mediterranean. Whoever held this city held a pair of scissors to the map of Eurasian trade, and to protect that unimaginable prize, they built not just a wall, but a layered nightmare for any attacker. The walls were a masterpiece of defensive engineering, 3 consecutive lines of fortification stretching from the Sea to the Golden Horn. A wide moat, then an outer wall, then a higher, massively thick inner wall studded with nearly 100 towers. For over 800 years, they were considered utterly impregnable. But to see them only as a shield is to miss their true purpose. They were the armored vault protecting the greatest commercial hub on Earth. Constantinople was the western terminus of the Silk Road, the place where overland caravans met seafaring vessels. Its markets brimmed with silks from China, spices from India, furs from the north, and grains from the Black Sea breadbasket. The walls existed to make this economic engine inviolable. By securing the city, the Byzantine Empire secured its stranglehold on the Bosporus. Every ship moving grain from the Crimea to Athens, or carrying Persian luxuries to Italy, had to sail directly past the city's sea walls, under the gaze of its emperors and the reach of its customs officers. The walls were a statement, a declaration that this vital seam in the world's fabric was stitched shut for the benefit of one empire alone. They turned a bustling metropolis into an unassailable toll booth, proving that the most formidable fortifications are not built to defend land, but to protect a revenue stream. While Constantinople gripped a strait, another civilization dreamed of erasing a peninsula entirely. Long before modern dredgers carved the Suez Canal, the pharaohs of Egypt gazed at the map and saw a problem. Between the rich ports of the Mediterranean and the tantalizing trade routes of the Red Sea lay a brutal, waterless barrier, the Sinai Desert. Caravans could cross it but slowly, at great risk, and with their loads diminished by the journey. The solution was as bold as it was logical: cut a water road directly through. As early as the 19th century before the Common Era, Pharaoh III is believed to have ordered the first attempt, a channel linking the Nile to the Red Sea. This was not the direct cut we see today, but a clever workaround, using the Nile's existing branches and a series of lakes to create a navigable passage. The vision was breathtaking: to turn Egypt from a land bridge into a maritime superhighway. Centuries later, the Persian Emperor I revived and completed the project, leaving inscriptions boasting that ships could now sail from Egypt to Persia. The Greek Ptolemaic dynasty that followed further refined this aquatic lifeline. Their goal was singular: to seize control of the lucrative spice trade flowing from the Indian Ocean. By creating a direct sea link, they could bypass the desert caravans and their myriad middlemen. Imagine a merchant ship from India, its hold packed with pepper and cinnamon. Instead of unloading at a Red Sea port, paying for camels, and risking a weeks-long desert trek to the Nile, it could now sail directly into the heart of Egypt. There, Ptolemaic officials waited to tax the cargo before it was transferred to another vessel for the final journey to Alexandria and the hungry markets of the Mediterranean world. This ancient canal was a megastructure of pure economic aggression, a deliberate shortcut designed to reroute the wealth of an ocean through a single, taxable funnel. It turned Egypt's geography from an obstacle into a monopoly. Yet these canals were ephemeral giants, constantly battling the desert's will, silting up and requiring Herculean efforts to maintain. Their repeated resurrection by different empires, from pharaohs to Persian kings to Greek rulers, proves a powerful point. The desire to dominate a trade is so potent that it compels leaders to try, again and again, to move the earth itself. But controlling a sea lane or a desert canyon is one thing. Mastering a sliver of land where an army's might means nothing is another. There is a place in Greece where the very earth seems to conspire to create a perfect bottleneck, a coastal pass so narrow that for centuries it was the only practical road between the north and the south. This is Thermopylae, a name forever etched in legend by a stand of 300 Spartans. Yet that legendary battle was a single, dramatic moment in a much longer story, a story of stone and strategy that lasted for. The pass itself is geography's ultimate trap, with steep, impassable mountains pressing down on one side and the treacherous marshes of the Malian Gulf on the other. At its narrowest, perhaps only a few dozen men could stand shoulder to shoulder. This was not just a road, it was a turnstile for entire civilizations moving south toward the rich city-states and critical ports of the Aegean Sea. Understanding this, the Greeks did not rely on bravery alone. Long before and long after King made his stand, the strategic mind saw the obvious: this choke point could and must be physically locked. Successive powers built and rebuilt fortifications at Thermopylae. The wall, an ancient barrier of stone, was just one in a series of attempts to gate this passage. Later, the Macedonian kings, masters of controlling territory, also fortified it, understanding that holding this pass meant controlling who and what could reach the political heart of Greece. Its value was not in the dirt of the pass itself, but in what lay beyond it: the ports of Athens, Corinth, and Thebes, the shipyards and the markets that connected Greece to the entire Mediterranean. By fortifying Thermopylae, a power could decide which armies threatened the south, which traders could access the Aegean trade networks, and ultimately which cities could thrive. The stones at Thermopylae tell a quieter, more enduring tale than the battle. They testify to the endless effort to put a door on a hallway, to turn a geographical accident into a permanent instrument of power. Proving that sometimes the most important walls are built not around cities, but in the empty spaces between them. The logic of water control reaches its zenith not in a canal, but in a dam. In the arid highlands of what is now Yemen, the ancient kingdom of Saba, the land of the legendary Queen of Sheba, faced a paradox. They sat atop the source of unimaginable wealth, for the precious resins of frankincense and myrrh could only be harvested from scraggly trees that grew in this specific region. Yet the land itself was harsh, prone to punishing droughts and flash floods. To command the trade in these sacred fragrances, they first had to command the rain. Their answer was the dam, a megastructure of earth and stone that did not block a trade route, but rather manufactured the very power to enforce one. For over 1,000 years, This engineering marvel captured the seasonal waters that rushed down from the mountains, taming them into a vast, reliable irrigation system that turned the desert fringe into a continuous garden. Fields of grains, fruits, and fodder crops bloomed where dust once ruled. This agricultural miracle was the foundation of everything. It supported a large, settled population in a region where others were scattered and nomadic. It fed a standing army and a sophisticated administration. With their basic survival guaranteed by the dam's bounty, the Sabaeans could focus their entire civilization on a single, lucrative purpose: monopolizing the incense trade. Every caravan laden with frankincense, destined for temples and palaces from Rome to Persia, had to begin its journey in their territory. The dam gave them the surplus wealth to build fortified outposts along the desert tracks, the means to pay soldiers to patrol them, and the economic stability to negotiate from a position of unshakable strength. They did not just sell incense, they controlled its very exit from the Arabian interior. The water stored behind that wall of stone was not merely for drinking or farming, it was liquid sovereignty, the quiet, relentless force that allowed a kingdom to hold the scent of the divine hostage and charge the ancient world a fortune for its release. A single mountain pass can become the hinge of history. High in the rugged Taurus Mountains of southern Turkey, a narrow, winding gorge known as the Cilician Gates presented ancient empires with a stark choice: conquer this geological lock or be locked out of half the world. This was not merely a difficult road. It was for centuries the only viable passage through a formidable mountain wall, separating the Anatolian plateau from the fertile plains of Syria and Mesopotamia. To control this pass was to control the land bridge between Asia and Europe, and every empire that rose to power in the region understood this with absolute clarity. The story of the Cilician Gates is told not by one fortress, but by a ghostly network of them, a layered history of stone built by Hittites, Assyrians, Persians, and finally Romans, each adding their own walls to the same vital pinch point. Their goal was always twofold: to slow an invading army and, more importantly, to regulate the lifeblood of commerce. For this pass was the linchpin of the legendary Persian Royal Road, a 2,500-mile superhighway of its day that connected the Aegean Sea to the heart of Persia. Imagine the caravans, a river of goods flowing both ways, carrying silver from Anatolia, textiles from Mesopotamia, and spices from the distant east. Every bale, every chest, every trader had to squeeze through this mountain defile. By fortifying its heights with castles like the imposing Roman stronghold at, empires installed a permanent toll booth in the sky. They could tax this river of wealth at its narrowest point, where evasion was impossible. The succession of fortresses, each built upon the ruins of the last, speaks to a relentless truth: geography awards its greatest prizes only to those willing to build a cage around them. The silent stones of the Taurus Mountains are not just ruins, they are the fossilized remains of an idea that to command a continent's trade, you must first command its door. The sea itself has a gate, and the ancients knew exactly where to find it. At the western edge of the known world, where the Mediterranean Sea finally spills into the vast, terrifying expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, two great mountains rise from the waves. To the north, the monolithic rock of Gibraltar, known in antiquity as. To the south, across a strait only 8 miles wide, the mountain of Jebel called. Together, they formed the legendary Pillars of Hercules, a boundary that was far more than a navigational marker. This was the ultimate psychological and physical, the final valve on the entire Mediterranean basin. For any ship, leaving the relative safety of the inland sea for the mysterious Atlantic, or bringing the riches of the outer ocean back to the civilized world, There was no other way. The strait was a funnel, and whoever built fortifications on its pillars held their hands around its neck. The Phoenicians, master mariners and traders, were likely the first to see its strategic potential, establishing lookout posts on these commanding heights. Their successors, the Carthaginians, expanded them, understanding that controlling this gate meant controlling the flow of two critical resources: tin from the distant mines of Britain, essential for making bronze, and gold from the rivers of West Africa. Later, the Romans, in their relentless drive to systematize control, built proper fortresses and a network of watchtowers on both shores. From these stone perches, sentinels could monitor every vessel, their sails tiny specks on the water far below. The goal was not to block passage, but to regulate it absolutely. A ship laden with Cornish tin or African ivory could not slip by unseen. It would be hailed, guided perhaps to a specific anchorage, and its cargo assessed for taxation. The fortifications on the Pillars of Hercules turned a geographical feature into a customs house spanning a continent. They made the ocean's doorway a toll booth, proving that the most powerful borders are not just lines on a map, but places where the world narrows to a point, and someone is always waiting there to count what passes through. But a mountain pass can be more than a gate. It can be a living corridor of conquest and commerce, its stones echoing with the footsteps of countless armies and the bells of 10,000 camels. This is the story of the pass, a 33-mile gash through the Spin Mountains that has served as the sole practical doorway between Central Asia and the vast riches of the Indian subcontinent. To look at it is to see geography writing an invitation to both traders and conquerors, a winding, narrow track where history was funneled into a single, decisive stream. Every empire that aspired to touch India, from the Achaemenid Persians to Alexander the Great, from the to the British, had to first master this rocky defile. And their method of mastery was always the same. They built stone sentinels to watch over it. Forts like the formidable Ali Masjid, perched on a sheer cliff, were not merely military bases, they were dual-purpose instruments of power. Their high walls and commanding gun emplacements could rain fire down on any army foolish enough to try a forced passage, turning the narrow valley into a deadly shooting gallery. But for the vast majority of its history, the pass buzzed not with the clamor of war, but with the patient rhythm of trade. This was the Silk Road's southern artery, where caravans laden with Indian spices, dazzling textiles, and precious gems began their long journey westward to the courts of Persia and beyond. The same forts that stood guard against invasion also housed the customs officers. As a line of weary camels snaked through the pass below, watchful officials would calculate the duty owed on every sack of pepper, every bolt of fine muslin, every chest of lapis lazuli. The fort's cannons guaranteed safe passage from bandits, but its ledger books ensured the empire received its share. That demonstrates a profound truth about these ancient, the same structure built to slam the door shut against an army was also built to keep the door carefully, profitably, open for business. Control was never just about denial. It was about taxation, regulation, and turning a geographical bottleneck into a perpetual source of wealth. Sometimes the greatest shortcut is not a waterway, but a road that carries the sea itself. For centuries, the southern tip of Greece, a rugged peninsula called the Peloponnese, was a formidable obstacle for any ship sailing between the Ionian and Aegean seas. The voyage around it was not only long, adding hundreds of miles to a journey, but notoriously treacherous, with capricious winds and rocky shores claiming countless vessels and their precious cargo. But there was a slender loophole in this geography, a neck of land barely 4 miles wide connecting the peninsula to the mainland, the Isthmus of Corinth. And here, around the 6th century before the Common Era, an ingenious and utterly unique megastructure was born, not to bridge a gap, but to erase one. They called it a stone-paved roadway built with deep, parallel grooves cut into its limestone surface. This was no ordinary road. It was a specialized track, an ancient railroad for ships. When a merchant captain wished to avoid the perilous southern cape, he would sail to one side of the isthmus. There, his vessel would be carefully unloaded. Then, using a system of ropes, wooden rollers, and immense human or animal labor, the ship itself would be hauled out of the water, cradled on the rollers, and dragged across the 4-mile divide on this grooved stone track to be relaunched on the opposite sea. It was a staggering feat of logistics, a physical portage on a monumental scale. For the city-state of Corinth, which controlled the isthmus, there was not just an engineering marvel, it was a printing press for money. They held the ultimate leverage, the power to offer safety and save time. Every merchant who chose this shortcut had to pay a toll for the privilege. Corinthian officials determined the fee based on the size of the ship and the value of its cargo, which still sat on the docks awaiting the vessel's transit. It was a flawless system of control, taxing not just goods but geography itself. They turned a narrow strip of land into a continental-scale turnstile, a deliberate bottleneck created not by nature, but by human ambition, where the rulers could charge the ancient world a premium for the simple, brilliant act of moving a mountain, or at least moving a ship over one. While some empires built roads to bypass capes, one civilization undertook a project so vast it would reshape the very internal geography of a continent. In the 7th century, the newly established Sui dynasty of China faced a problem of staggering scale. Their fertile southern provinces along the Yangtze River produced a colossal surplus of rice, the lifeblood of the state. Yet the political and military power was concentrated in the arid north, in the capital, and along the vulnerable frontier where armies stood guard. Transporting this essential grain tax overland was slow, costly, and vulnerable to banditry. Sending it by sea along the eastern coast risked shipwrecks and piracy. The Sui emperors envisioned a solution of breathtaking ambition to stitch the country together with water. They did not dig a single new canal from scratch, but performed a feat of bureaucratic and engineering genius, linking and expanding a patchwork of older waterways into one coherent system. The result was the Grand Canal, a megastructure that would eventually stretch over 1,100 miles, connecting the Yellow River in the north to the Yangtze in the south. This was not built for foreign trade or public convenience, it was built for control. The canal created a secure, stay-toned aquatic highway running safely inland, away from the unpredictable coastal waters. Government grain barges, moving in vast, regulated convoys, could now float the entire distance from the southern rice baskets directly to the granaries of the capital and the storehouses of the northern garrisons. For the first time, the central government could reliably feed its massive standing army year-round, securing the frontier against nomadic incursions. More than that, it could stabilize the price of grain in the north, preventing famine and unrest. The Grand Canal was the ultimate administrative tool, a liquid pipeline that allowed the emperor in N to directly tap the wealth of the Yangtze Delta. By internalizing this vital north-south artery, the state removed any middlemen, any bandit lords, or any regional governor who might try to intercept the flow of tribute. It turned the most vital commodity in the empire into a predictable, manageable stream, proving that the greatest power sometimes lies not in controlling a border, but in mastering the currents that flow within. A different kind of treasure flowed from the cold northern forests, one that captured sunlight within itself. For over 2,000 years, the Amber Road carried golden lumps of fossilized resin from the stormy shores of the Baltic Sea all the way to the sun-drenched courts of the Mediterranean. This was not a single, paved highway, but a sprawling network of river routes and forest trails, a 1,000-mile journey through a world of dense wilderness and shifting tribal territories. The immense value of this translucent stone, prized for jewelry and amulets from Rome to Egypt, made the entire route a target for control, but no single empire could dominate its entire length. Instead, power was exercised in pieces through a strategic necklace of fortified choke points. At critical river crossings, narrow portage points between waterways, and the few safe landing spots along the coast, local Celtic and Germanic chieftains built strongholds of earth and timber. These were not grand cities, but purposeful, warlike settlements like those found along the Vistula River basin, positioned to command a view of the water and the paths beside it. Their function was brutally simple: to monitor and tax every piece of amber moving south. A trader carrying a pouch of the precious stones could not simply slip through the trackless woods. The rivers were his highways, and these forts guarded every bridge and ford. By controlling just a few miles of riverbank, a local ruler could lay claim to a percentage of a luxury item destined for a Roman senator's ring or an Egyptian priest's ceremonial regalia. This decentralized system of toll stations turned the Amber Road into a cascading series of economic filters, where the value of the sunstone was incrementally claimed by a chain of local powers, each adding their own price for safe passage. It proved that a trade route did not need a single, mighty gatekeeper. A series of well-placed locks could harvest its wealth just as effectively. The desert does not simply ask for tribute, it demands survival. Our final ancient megastructure is not a single monument, but a scattered constellation of stone, a life support system etched across 1,000 miles of sand and rock. This was the infrastructure of the Incense route, a chain of caravanserais, fortified wells, and watchtowers that stitched the deserts of Arabia and the Negev into a manageable and taxable highway. For and later the Romans who absorbed their trade, controlling the flow of frankincense and myrrh was not about patrolling a road. It was about controlling every single drop of water along it. In that landscape, a well was not a resource, it was a sovereign territory. A caravanserai was not a hotel, it was a checkpoint where the desert itself enforced the rules. These were built at precise intervals, calculated for a single day's camel journey. A caravan master, his animals parched and his precious resin cargo baking in the sun, had no choice but to stop at the next fort. There, under the gaze of soldiers, he would pay for water, fodder, and shelter, and in doing so, his entire load would be assessed for the royal tax. The genius was in the monopoly of necessity. By securing every reliable water source for hundreds of miles, they made evasion impossible. A merchant could not simply dig his own well or wander off the established path. The desert was a silent partner in this enforcement, a vast, deadly moat around each oasis fortress. The Romans, pragmatic inheritors of this system, expanded it, building larger, more permanent stations like those at, and turning the entire route into a state-controlled pipeline. These silent ruins in the desert tell the most fundamental story of all, that the ultimate is not a mountain or a strait, but a basic human need. By building stone citadels around water, these empires built cages around desire itself, proving that the most powerful walls are often those that enclose not a city, but a simple, life-giving spring. 15 structures, scattered across continents and centuries, whisper the same relentless truth. Whether carved from desert rock or built upon mountain passes, they all obeyed a deeper, universal logic of power. The methods varied, but the strategic playbook was remarkably consistent. Some empires chose to raid the caravans that passed through their territory, a quick but volatile source of wealth. The wiser, more enduring powers chose to tax them instead. Raiding was a harvest that eventually left the field barren, but taxation cultivated a perpetual garden. It guaranteed the merchants safe passage, incentivized more trade, and created a predictable, renewable stream of revenue that could fund armies, build cities, and stabilize a realm for generations. The choice between the sword and the ledger was the choice between a fleeting conquest and a lasting civilization. The nature of the choke point itself dictated the method of control. Some powers mastered the geographical narrows, the mountain defiles and sea straits where the world simply ran out of room. Their fortresses were plugs in a bottleneck, impossible to avoid. Others, especially in the merciless deserts, mastered a more fundamental currency, necessity itself. They did not just guard a road, they manufactured the reason to stop on it. By building the only well for 100 miles or the only safe harbor on a treacherous coast, they turned survival into a transaction. A caravan could, in theory, skirt a mountain fortress, but it could not skirt thirst. This control over water, food, and shelter was a softer, more insidious form of power, one that did not confront the trader with a wall, but with an offer he could not refuse. And what of the walls themselves? The architecture of these places served a dual purpose, one practical, one profoundly psychological. The thick ramparts, towering citadels, and imposing gates were, of course, for defense. But their scale and artistry were for the mind. Emerging from the claustrophobic darkness of at Petra to see the glowing treasury facade was a calculated shock. Sailing beneath the monstrous sea walls of Constantinople was an exercise in feeling small. These structures were built to impress, to intimidate, and to legitimize. They told the traveler, the merchant, and the potential enemy that the power here was not just strong, but permanent, ordained, and worthy of respect. The architecture was the first and most powerful collector of the toll, extracting a payment of awe before a single coin changed hands. Perhaps the most profound legacy of these trade control megastructures is what they grew into. A simple toll booth, if successful enough, needs warehouses, then markets, then homes for the merchants and guards, then temples for their prayers. The fortress at the pass became a town. The customs house on the river became a city. Petra, Constantinople, Alexandria, Samarkand, these were not just places that controlled trade, they were creations of trade. The wealth they filtered funded libraries, universities, and staggering works of art. The diverse peoples funneled through their gates mingled in their streets, exchanging not only goods but languages, ideas, and faiths. The very act of controlling a choke point, of trying to regulate and tax human exchange, inevitably generated an explosion of unregulated cultural exchange. The stone sentinels built to enforce a monopoly became the unintended of melting pots. In the end, the great lesson written in this ancient stone is not merely about greed or power. It is a lesson about connection. The hunger to control the flow of civilization, ironically, is what guaranteed that civilization would always, irresistibly flow. These monuments of stone and earth were never merely symbols of power, they were its physical machinery. Each rampart, each canal, each towering lighthouse was an economic lever, carefully positioned to move the weight of the world's wealth in a favored direction. The obsession with controlling these narrows did far more than fill royal treasuries. It became the engine for humanity's most daring leaps of engineering, and the spark for its most devastating conflicts. The labor of thousands, the genius of architects, the wealth of nations, all were marshaled to answer a single, relentless question: how do we lock this door for ourselves? From the siege of Constantinople to the campaigns for the pass, the map of ancient warfare is often just a map of armies clashing over toll booths. Yet this ancient logic is not a relic. Look at a modern map, and you will see the same story written in different ink. The Suez and Panama canals are our, man-made, where global shipping is funneled and measured. The Strait of Hormuz and the Malacca Strait are our Pillars of Hercules, narrow sea lanes where a single incident can send shockwaves through the world's economy. The commodities have changed from frankincense to oil, from silk to semiconductors, but the fundamental game remains unchanged. Control the pinch point, and you hold leverage over everyone who must pass through it. The silent, sun-bleached ruins we have explored are not just echoes of the past. They are the original blueprints, the first drafts of a strategy that still defines our world. They remind us that geography sets the board, but human ambition forever seeks to build the pieces that control it.